My niece tried to steal and sell my collection of concert recordings worth $150 million and my Steinway grand piano. But the truth caught up with her faster than the auctioneer's gavel. I sometimes wonder at 74 how it is that one can feel both so full of life and yet so completely alone. My days are quiet now, quieter than I ever imagined they would be. The phone hardly rings, the mail is mostly bills or leaflets, and I've long since stopped waiting for knocks at the door. But here in this old house in Vienna, surrounded by shelves of vinyl and tape reels, I can still hear the applause. Faint perhaps, but still there. You see, once upon a time, I was not just a grandmotherly woman fussing over tea and shawls. I was the pride of stages in Vienna, New York, and Paris. The girl who sat before the Steinway, hands trembling only until the first note. And then it was as if I belonged to the instrument or it belonged to me. They called me a prodigy at 10, a genius at 15, and by 22, I was touring the world with an orchestra behind me and reviews that spoke of divinity channeled through human hands. I don't know about divinity, but I do know I worked harder than anyone could see. My Steinway still stands in the drawing room, its black lacquer gleaming faintly in the afternoon light. It was a gift, well, more of a recognition from Steinway themselves after my debut in New York. A grand handcrafted in Hamburg, the kind reserved for only the finest. Today they say it's worth around $64 million. But to me its worth cannot be measured. Every scar in its wood, every ivory key polished by my fingers, is a chapter of my life. I don't see money when I look at it. I see Carnegie Hall. I see the Opera House in Sydney. I see my mother in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief while pretending she wasn't crying. The recordings, those are my true treasure. Reel after reel, boxed carefully in the cabinet, marked in my own handwriting. Moscow 1968, Berlin 1974, New York 1980. Each one carries not just the music, but the air of the hall, the breath of the audience, the rustle before the storm of applause. They are my proof that once I had lived brightly, that once I gave something to the world. But life has a way of shrinking, doesn't it? After the ovations and the bouquets, there comes silence. First, I told myself it was welcome. A chance to rest these hands so often cramped and sore. A chance to wake in my own bed, and not in some hotel where the curtains never quite closed. I taught for a while, but the young ones were more interested in competitions and fame than in loving the music. I could not bear to watch them treat Beethoven like a race to be won. So I stopped. Slowly, almost without meaning to. Concerts became rare, then occasional, and finally none at all. The world moved on. New names, new faces. They called me a living legend when I received the Lifetime Achievement Award in '95. But even then I knew legend was another word for forgotten. Now my treasures are what remain. That Steinway, shining like an old soldier still standing at attention. Those recordings lined up like faithful friends waiting to be remembered. Sometimes I play them, letting the sound wash through the house until it feels, for a moment, that I am there again, bowing before the thunder of hands. Other times I simply sit beside the piano, laying my palm on the wood, as if to remind it that I am still here. People often ask why I never sold them. The truth is they are not mine to sell. Not really. They belong to the music, to those who once filled the halls. I was merely their guardian. And besides, what could money give me now? A woman can eat only so much bread, drink only so much tea. Wealth was never what mattered. It was always the music. Still, the world has a way of circling back to what you own rather than who you are. Visitors, rare as they are, speak of the value of the collection, of what it could fetch at auction. They mention numbers with too many zeros as if that is supposed to tempt me. I nod politely, pour them another cup and change the subject. But inside I feel a little sting, as though they see me only as a vault, not a woman. Yes, my past was one of greatness and I do not deny it. But today it sits in boxes and beneath a heavy piano lid, waiting for what I cannot yet say. Perhaps for someone to remember that behind the music was a girl with trembling hands, who gave her whole self to the keys. And as I sit in this quiet 74 years behind me, I sometimes wonder, was it enough? Did I give the world all that I could? Or is there yet a chapter left for me to play? Family can be a blessing, but mercy me, it can also be a thorn in the side. At 74, I've come to believe that relatives will either cradle your legacy or try to carve it up before you're even gone. My niece Clara, Lord, I remember her running about as a girl, curls bouncing, always humming the little scales I taught her. She had music in her bones, though not in her fingers. She didn't have the patience for hours at the piano, but she had a sharp ear and later a sharper tongue. She grew into a woman who could charm a room full of strangers while keeping her eyes fixed on the bottom line. Clara works in what she calls art management. I've never been sure what that means, other than traveling too much and speaking as though every painting, every score, every instrument is a commodity to be leveraged. She visits me every few weeks now, sweeping in with her silk scarves and her leather tote bag, sitting at my table as if she were running a board meeting. She always begins kindly enough. "Aunt, how are you managing? Do you need anything? Should I arrange for a nurse to visit?" But it never takes long for her voice to slide into business. "The family should take care of the legacy," she told me just last spring, her hands folded neatly over mine. She used the word family as if it were a cloak she could wrap herself in, one that granted her automatic rights to everything I've cherished. I listened, nodding softly, but inside I bristled. My music was never the family's. It was mine. My calloused hands, my missed meals, my years of travel and sacrifice. No one stayed up with me while I practiced until dawn. No one soothed my tears when I faltered before a performance. And yet now, here she was, speaking as though the Steinway and the recordings were some communal potluck dish that needed to be divided fairly among kin. She has a way of dressing her intentions in kindness. "You shouldn't worry yourself about legal matters anymore, Aunt," she said once, pouring me tea as though she were the hostess in my own home. "You've done enough. Let us take the burden." Her words dripped with honey, but her eyes flickered like a dealer's at a card table. I wanted to laugh. Burden, she called it. That piano has been my companion longer than any man, steadier than any friend. The recordings, they are not papers or trinkets. They are living proof of nights when my soul caught fire before thousands. And she thought of them as burdens. Still I kept my temper. A lifetime on the stage teaches you when to smile, when to bow, when to let the silence do the talking. I nodded, sipped my tea, and said nothing. But in the quiet of the evening after she had gone, I sat by the piano and pressed one key. Just one, low and soft, until the sound faded into the walls. It was my way of reminding myself, you are still here. This is still yours. But the visits grew more frequent. Clara began to drop names as though to impress me. She spoke of directors, curators, auction houses. "They all respect your work, Aunt," she would say, her voice smooth. "They believe these treasures deserve to be in the hands of institutions that can preserve them properly." I bit back the words that rose in me. They've been preserved just fine by my hands for 50 years. What troubled me most was her certainty. She spoke not as though suggesting, but as though decisions had already been made. One evening she walked through my house with her phone held out, filming the piano, the shelves of recordings, even the framed programs on the walls. "For cataloging purposes," she explained. I said nothing, but my stomach turned. Cataloging is what you do when you're preparing to ship something away. And I began to notice her impatience too. The way she sighed when I spoke of my memories. The way she fiddled with her pen when I refused to sign the documents she slid across the table. At first, she cloaked her ambition in gentleness, but soon it showed itself like a wolf's teeth beneath sheep's wool. It dawned on me slowly like a shadow stretching across the room. Clara was not visiting to keep me company. She was circling, like a hawk above a field, waiting for the old hare to tire. One morning after she left, I found myself speaking aloud in the empty kitchen. The family should take care of the legacy, I repeated, mimicking her tone. Then I chuckled bitterly. My dear husband is gone, my siblings long buried. I live alone in this house with a piano for company. What family did she mean? Herself. I thought back to the little girl who once sat at my knee, listening as I played Chopin, eyes wide with wonder. That child is long gone. In her place stands a woman who sees only dollar signs and ivory keys. And though she dresses her schemes in silk and charm, I feel it. She wants what is mine. I told myself I must be careful now. Watchful. Because when family begins to speak of legacies, they are not thinking of memory or music. They are thinking of inheritance. And inheritance, my dear, is the hungriest word of them all. It was a Tuesday, damp and gray. The kind of day that presses a heaviness onto your shoulders. I was tidying my study, a ritual I keep though no one visits anymore, when I noticed Clara's tote bag on the chair by the window. She had left it behind after her last visit. My first thought was to ring her and tell her, but something made me pause. Clara is careful to a fault. For her to forget a bag seemed strange, almost staged. I carried it to the desk, meaning to set it aside, but the strap fell open, and a neat folder slid out. Heavy, cream-colored paper peeked through. The kind that smells faintly of ink and money. I should have put it back. But instead, with a heart that beat too fast for an old woman, I sat down and opened it. There, in bold black print, were the names Sotheby's and Christie's. Grand auction houses, their logos sharp and official. The words danced before me. Exclusive cultural property auction. Lot 117, archival recordings of my name. Lot 118, Steinway grand piano, Hamburg, 1960s. My breath caught. I read again. And again. Dates. Prices. Estimates written in a neat column. My stomach sank when I saw the figures. Tens of millions. My piano. My recordings. My life reduced to lots under a hammer. At first I thought it might be some catalog, some draft of a proposal she was preparing. But then I noticed the signatures at the bottom. Mine. Or rather, something that tried to be mine. The loop of the M was too shallow. The tail of the R cut short. And the date, August 14, 2024, was impossible. I hadn't signed a thing in years, let alone this month. I flipped to another page. Contracts stamped with a red seal. Pages marked with glossy logos, yet something was off. The fonts were mismatched. The language clumsy, as though translated twice. The undersigned consents to the transference of heritage property to institutionally recognized auction services. No lawyer worth his salt would write so poorly. My hands trembled, but not from age. From anger. Clara had forged me. She had sat at my table pouring tea, asking about my health, and all the while, she was building a paper trail to strip me of everything I held dear. I laid the pages out across the desk, smoothing the creases. There were at least 6 contracts, each stamped and signed. And yet, in every one, the mistakes glared at me. Wrong dates. Wrong titles. My birthplace listed as Salzburg instead of Vienna. My middle name misspelled. Forgeries, yes, but sloppy ones. Still, sloppy or not, I knew how dangerous they could be. To an untrained eye, they looked convincing enough. And Clara, with her silver tongue, could surely persuade some unsuspecting buyer that these papers were genuine. I leaned back in my chair, pressing a hand to my temple. The study felt colder than it had a moment before. My eyes wandered to the shelves, to the boxes of tapes labeled in my handwriting, to the piano in the other room, silent beneath its cover. The thought of them being carted away, sold to strangers, paraded in glossy catalogs, it made me sick. For a moment I felt very old. 74 years weighed on me, heavy as the stone walls of this house. Clara was young, clever, ambitious. She had energy I no longer possessed. And yet, as I sat there, a spark lit in me. I had survived concert tours across continents. I had faced critics who sharpened their pens like knives. I had played through fevers, heartbreak, and exhaustion. Surely, I could face a niece with too much ambition. I gathered the papers carefully, tucking them back into the folder. When Clara returned that evening, all smiles and apologies for her forgetfulness, I handed her the tote with a steady hand. "You left this," I said softly. She blushed, thanked me, and hurried off. But I had seen enough. That night I sat at the piano in the dark. I did not play. I only rested my fingers on the keys, feeling the coolness seep into my skin. Music had always been my answer, my refuge. But this was not a battle for notes or applause. This was a battle for truth. I promised myself then I would not be outplayed. Clara thought me frail, thought me blind. But she had underestimated the one thing she could never forge, my memory. I remembered every note I had ever played, every contract I had ever signed. And I remembered enough to know that what lay in her folder was not the truth. Still, the danger was real. With forged papers in circulation, the possibility of damage was enormous. If those documents reached the wrong hands, even a scandal could erupt. And though I despised her betrayal, part of me ached with sadness. Family. My own blood plotting against me. It stung worse than any critic's review ever had. I sat long into the night, the house quiet around me. And as the clock struck midnight, I knew the silence would not last. This was only the beginning. Clara's intentions were no longer hidden. They were stamped, sealed, and signed in counterfeit ink. And I, though weary, was ready to answer. It was a Sunday afternoon, the sort of day when I usually treat myself to a slow walk around the garden, trimming roses or humming a bit of Brahms under my breath. But Clara had other plans. She arrived unannounced, as she often did now, with a rustle of perfume and papers. She breezed in, kissed my cheek with lips that barely touched, and sat herself down in the parlor as though she owned it. "Aunt," she began, folding her hands as though she were about to deliver a sermon, "we need to talk plainly." I smiled gently, settling myself in the armchair opposite her. "Plain talk, my dear? That usually means unpleasantness." She laughed, though it didn't reach her eyes. "You're no longer able to handle these matters. You've done so much, carried this legacy for decades. But it's time to trust us now. Trust the family. Trust us." The very words soured in my mouth. But I tilted my head and let my eyes soften, playing the part she expected. A frail, forgetful woman, perhaps grateful for someone younger to manage things. It was a role I had performed better than most operas. "What matters are you referring to, Clara?" I asked, voice thin as tissue. She leaned forward, her bracelets clinking. "The contracts, the collections, the piano. You must know you can't maintain these responsibilities. The legal protections alone, it's overwhelming. I've spoken with experts, Aunt. They all agree." I folded my hands in my lap, lowering my gaze. Overwhelming, yes, the world is so complicated now. That seemed to embolden her. She opened her bag and pulled out a leather folder. I caught a flash of the documents I had seen before, the forgeries. She spread them on the coffee table between us, the logos gleaming in the afternoon light. "You see? Everything is arranged. All it needs is your signature." Her pen lay ready, a viper coiled and waiting. For a moment silence filled the room. I reached for the papers, letting my fingers tremble ever so slightly, though not from weakness. I traced the margins, pausing at my counterfeit signature. "I don't remember signing this," I whispered. Clara smiled too quickly. "That's because you didn't. This is just a draft copy. Formalities. When you sign, it becomes official." "Ah," I said softly, handing it back. So this is the world now. All signatures look the same. Her brow furrowed just for a second. Then she pressed the pen toward me. It's really for the best. You don't want to leave these things in disarray. Imagine the burden for others later. Let me take care of it now. I placed the pen down neatly as though it were too heavy for me. Perhaps you're right, my dear. But I'd like to think before I do anything so final. Her smile faltered. Time is of the essence. Interest is high, and the longer we wait, the harder it becomes. You wouldn't want to lose value, would you? There it was, that word again. Value. To her, it was never about the music, the art, the history. It was about numbers on a page. I kept my face serene, though my heart clenched. Value, I repeated, looking past her toward the piano. Do you know, Clara, when I played in New York in '72, the critic wrote that I gave the audience something priceless? He didn't mention dollars. She chuckled softly, as one does to humor an elder drifting into reminiscence. Yes, Aunt. But times are different now. We must be practical. I sighed, closing my eyes. I grow tired. Perhaps tomorrow we speak again. Her impatience was sharp, but she masked it with a quick nod. She gathered her papers, tucking them back into her bag. Of course. Rest well, Aunt. But please don't wait too long. When she had gone, the silence felt heavier than usual. I sat still for a long time, staring at the empty coffee table where her documents had rested. Then slowly I rose and walked to the writing desk. My hands no longer trembled. I pulled out an old leather address book, yellowed with age, and turned to a name I hadn't spoken aloud in years. Herr Weiss, my lawyer from the touring days. He had defended me once against a predatory contract, back when I was young and dazzled by fame. He had looked me straight in the eye and said, "You play the music, I will play the law." I picked up the telephone and dialed, not sure if he would still answer, not even sure if he still lived. To my astonishment, a familiar, gravelly voice greeted me. Older, slower, but him. Herr Weiss, I said softly. This is your old client. I'm afraid I need you once more. There was a pause, then a low chuckle. I wondered when you'd call. Tell me everything. And so I did. The forged contracts, the auction talk, Clara's persuasion. I laid it bare. Every word soaked in both anger and sorrow. He listened without interruption, and when I finished, he said something that made my blood run cold and hopeful all at once. My dear, I believe I know where the true recordings are. They were never in your niece's hands at all. I pressed the receiver tight. Where then? The Vienna Opera, he said. They've been there since the 1980s. Restoration work. They are the guardians, not your niece. If she has papers, they are lies. The silence between us swelled, but this time it was not despair. It was resolve. Clara thought me weak, but she had played her hand too soon. I set down the receiver, walked to the piano, and pressed a single chord, deep, resonant, defiant. The sound filled the house like a declaration. The game was changing, and I was not finished yet. I did not sleep much after that telephone call. My house was quiet, the kind of heavy quiet that presses against your chest. But my mind was alive like a rehearsal night before a debut. I sat by the window, the curtains drawn back, and let the streetlight spill across my lap as I replayed every word Herr Weiss had told me. The Vienna Opera, he had said, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. But to me, it felt like someone had suddenly thrown open a locked door. Back in the 1980s, after years of touring, the opera had approached me. They offered to restore my concert recordings, those reels of tape that had traveled in battered suitcases across oceans and continents. Time had already begun to wear on them. You could hear a faint hiss beneath the music, the sort of thing only the most careful ear would notice. I remember the opera's archivist, a gentle man with spectacles that always slid down his nose, telling me, "These are treasures. Let us care for them." And so I had agreed. I signed papers, yes, but they were papers of preservation, not of sale. The reels were delivered to their vaults, where they promised climate control and professional restoration. I thought it temporary at the time, a courtesy to future scholars. I was still performing then, still filling halls. My mind was on the next program, not on what would become of the recordings after I was gone. But decades passed. Performances stopped. Friends and colleagues drifted away. My husband died. And in the fog of all that loss, I forgot, or perhaps I pushed aside, the fact that the originals were not here at all. What I had at home were copies cherished, yes, but not the true masters. And now Clara, with her forged contracts and glossy folder, had built her entire scheme on a falsehood. She had claimed to control something she never even touched. I rose from the chair and went to the cabinet where I kept my boxes of tapes. I pulled one down, Berlin 1974, and held it close. The handwriting was mine, but the tape itself was brittle, worn from years of being played. Not the pristine originals. Those had been resting all this time like sleeping giants beneath the opera in Vienna. I almost laughed aloud. My clever niece had tried to sell shadows. The next morning I called her Weiss again. "You're certain?" I asked, though I already knew. "Quite certain," he replied. "I was the one who drafted the agreement. They are held in trust by the opera. They can be played, studied, restored, but not sold. They are part of the cultural patrimony of Austria now. Your niece could not have them if she tried." I let out a long breath I didn't realize I had been holding. "Then the papers she showed me are worthless forgeries," he finished. "And dangerous ones. We must act quickly, before she convinces someone less careful than you." The word dangerous echoed in my head. Clara wasn't simply ambitious, she was reckless. And recklessness with sums like these could lead to ruin, for her and for me. Still, a sliver of sorrow pierced me. This was my sister's child. I had bounced her on my knee once, taught her to clap in time to a Mozart waltz. How had she grown into a woman who could look me in the eye, smile sweetly, and forge my name in the same breath? But sentiment could not be my guide now. I had lived too long to mistake treachery for love. Her wife suggested we gather proof. "We'll contact the opera formally. Let them confirm what they hold. If this reaches the press, we must be armed with facts, not just suspicions." The thought of press coverage made my stomach flutter. I had not seen my name in headlines for many years, not since the award ceremonies of the 90s. To return now, not as a pianist but as the victim of fraud, it felt bitter. Yet perhaps it was also a chance to remind the world that I was still here, still guarding the music. That afternoon Clara returned, bright as ever, with a bouquet of lilies. She placed them in a vase as though to sweeten the air between us. "Have you thought about what we discussed?" she asked. I forced my lips into a tremble, my voice into a sigh. "Oh, Clara, I fear I'm not as quick as I once was. I need more time." Her eyes sharpened. She wanted a signature and she wanted it soon. But I gave her nothing. She left with a polite kiss, though I caught the stiffness in her shoulders as she walked to the door. When the latch clicked behind her, I pressed my hand against the polished wood of the Steinway. "Not yet," I whispered. "She will not have you." That evening, I drafted a letter to the opera. My hand shook not with age but with purpose. I asked them, in the most formal tone I could muster, to confirm their custody of my archival recordings. I sealed the envelope with care, knowing it carried the weight of truth. As I placed it on the hall table, ready for the morning post, I felt a shift inside me. Clara believed me a fragile woman, but she had given me something unexpected. A key. Not to the piano, nor to the tapes, but to my own resolve. I was not powerless. I had not been erased. My music still lived, preserved in vaults, waiting. And I would not let her or anyone take it away. The curtain had risen on a new act. And this time, sweetheart, I would not play the frail old aunt. I would play the woman who once held audiences breathless with nothing but her two hands. The letter to the Vienna Opera had barely been posted when the first ripple reached me. It came not from Clara, but from a man I had never met, a journalist named Marcus Klein. He telephoned one morning, his German laced with the quick rhythm of Vienna. "Madam," he began politely, "I am investigating reports of cultural property being moved through shadow channels. Your name has arisen. May I speak with you?" For a moment, I almost put the receiver down. I had avoided journalists for decades. They always wanted the same tired story: my early fame, my sudden retreat, my silence. But there was something in his voice, sharp yet respectful, that made me pause. "What exactly do you want to know?" I asked. "That there are rumors," he said, lowering his voice as though someone might overhear. "Rumors that your recordings and piano are to be sold through private auctions, with questionable paperwork. Your niece's name has appeared alongside yours." I closed my eyes. So it had already begun. Clara's net had reached beyond family dinners and into the hungry mouths of the press. "I can tell you one thing," I said, keeping my tone steady. "If anyone claims to hold authentic documents of sale, they are lying. The originals are in the custody of the Vienna Opera. I have written to them for confirmation." There was a brief silence on the line. Then Marcus exhaled softly, like a man who has just uncovered a thread of gold. "That is important. May I meet you? May I see these supposed papers?" I hesitated, picturing Clara's forged contracts spread across my desk. Showing them might expose me to risk, yet hiding them would only leave her free to weave more lies. At last I agreed. "Come tomorrow. 10 o'clock. Bring no photographer." He arrived promptly, dressed in a worn jacket, his notepad tucked under his arm. He was younger than I expected, perhaps 40, with restless eyes that darted around the room, noting every detail. Yet when he looked at me, it was not as at a relic of the past but as at a witness. I laid the folder before him. He examined the contracts, running a finger over the clumsy seals, the mismatched fonts. "Yes," he murmured, "this is what I have heard. Forgeries, but convincing enough for a careless buyer. The market is full of such tricks. They rely on greed to blind the eyes." I poured him coffee, black and strong, and we sat across from each other like co-conspirators. He asked questions about Clara, about my career, about the recordings. I answered as best I could, my voice steady though my heart was sore. At one point he looked up sharply. "Do you realize what this means? If these documents circulate, it will not be only your niece who is implicated. Auction houses, dealers, even institutions, everyone could be tainted. The world does not easily forgive scandals in art." His words chilled me. I had lived my life for music, not money. The thought that my name might be dragged through mud, that my legacy could be reduced to a headline about fraud, was almost unbearable. Yet I also knew that silence would be worse. "Write what you must," I said at last. "But write the truth." He nodded solemnly, tucking the folder into his bag. "I promise you, madam, this will not be buried." That evening I found his article already online. The headline blazed across the screen: "Shadow Sales of Cultural Heritage, Legendary Pianist's Legacy in Question." My name sat in bold letters, side by side with words like forgery and fraud. My hands trembled as I read. Not with fear but with the weight of recognition. The quiet battle in my living room had become a public war. Marcus wrote with precision. He described the suspicious contracts, the unlikely auction dates, the forged signatures. He spoke of well-connected individuals in the art market who might profit from such sales. He did not name Clara directly, but the implication was clear enough. By nightfall, my telephone rang with messages from old colleagues, distant students, even a conductor from Paris who had not spoken to me in 20 years. "Is it true?" they asked. "Are you safe?" For the first time in years, I felt the world's eyes upon me again, not as a performer, but as a guardian of something precious. And though the attention frightened me, it also steeled me. Clara would no longer whisper her schemes in the safety of my parlor. The whole world was now listening. I went to bed late, the paper folded neatly on my nightstand. Sleep came fitfully, but in my dreams I was back on stage, the hall packed, the silence before the first note humming like electricity. Only this time the music was not what the people awaited. It was the truth. And I would play it, note for note, until the last echo faded. I used to think applause was the loudest sound in the world. But I was wrong. It is scandal. Scandal echoes in ways applause never could. Through telephones that won't stop ringing. Through newspaper ink that stains your fingertips. Through voices on the radio repeating your name as though it were breaking news. The morning after Marcus's article appeared, Vienna seemed to awaken in uproar. My telephone rang before I had even boiled water for tea. Old friends called, some with voices thick with concern, others with curiosity thinly veiled as sympathy. "We read about it in Die Presse. Is it true you nearly lost everything? Tell me, how could your own family?" I tried to answer politely, but my head spun. The article had spread like wildfire. By noon it was translated into English, French, even Japanese. International media latched onto it as if the world had been waiting for a scandal dressed in piano keys. "Legendary pianist's legacy at risk," read one headline in New York. Another from London asked, "Who owns culture? The case of the missing recordings." I stared at the papers stacked on my table, my name in fonts larger than I had ever seen, even in my prime. At 74, I had returned to the front page. But not for a triumphant performance, not for a new recording. For betrayal. Still, something unexpected happened. The world did not mock me. They rallied. Letters began to arrive, actual letters with stamps and envelopes, the kind I thought had vanished with the age of telegrams. From Brazil, from Canada, from tiny towns in Poland. Former students wrote, "You taught me that Beethoven is not to be played but lived. I stand with you." Musicians I had never met wrote, "We will not allow your legacy to be stolen." Even strangers said, "Your recordings carried me through grief, through study, through joy. They belong to the world, not to thieves." For the first time in years I felt less alone. Marcus called again, his voice brimming with urgency. "Madam, the story has struck a chord. Hundreds of messages flood our office. Musicians, historians, ordinary people. They see this not as a family quarrel, but as a fight for cultural heritage. You have become a symbol." A symbol. The word frightened me. I had only ever wanted to be a pianist. But symbols do not get to choose their role. Meanwhile, Clara grew bolder. She sent me messages dripping with false sweetness. "Aunt, the press has misunderstood everything. I only wanted what was best for you." But beneath her words I could hear the strain. She had not expected her quiet little scheme to become a public scandal. Television crews gathered outside the opera house, demanding to know the fate of the recordings. One journalist shouted, "Has the niece been contacted? What is her response?" Another asked, "Is the pianist herself cooperating with investigations?" I watched from my sitting room, the television casting flickering light across my walls, as though my life had become a stage again. Only this time the audience was the world, and I had not chosen the program. But what moved me most were the musicians. The Vienna Philharmonic issued a statement. "We stand by our colleague. Her music is part of Austria's soul." Former pupils sent videos of themselves playing my old repertoire, tagging them with my name saying, "We play for her." For days my mailbox overflowed with flowers. Neighbors who once passed me quietly on the street now stopped to press my hand, whispering, We are proud of you. Even children rang the bell, clutching small bouquets of daisies. And yet, in the quiet hours of the evening, I still sat alone by the Steinway, pressing a single note at a time, wondering how it had come to this. Applause had once been for music. Now it was for survival. Still, survival is no small thing. I thought of all those who had lost their legacies to greed, who had no voice loud enough to be heard. Perhaps I was old, but I had been given a platform again, and I could not waste it. By the end of the week, Marcus rang once more. Madam, prepare yourself. The opera will make a statement tomorrow. They will open the archives. I closed my eyes, the weight of 74 years pressing on me, yet a flicker of something long buried rising in my chest. Not hope, not yet, but anticipation. The scandal had erupted like a storm, sweeping me up whether I wished it or not. But storms, I reminded myself, also clear the air. And perhaps when the clouds parted, the truth would shine brighter than ever. The morning of the announcement, Vienna felt different. The air was crisp, almost ceremonial, as though the city itself was preparing for a performance. I rose early, made coffee, and sat in my good chair with my shawl around my shoulders. The television was on, volume low, the screen showing crowds already gathering outside the opera. It reminded me of the old days, the anticipation before a concert, the hushed murmur of an audience waiting for the curtain to rise. Only this time I was not at the piano. I was in my sitting room, an old woman with aching hands, watching strangers defend the music I had once given the world. At 11 o'clock sharp, the doors of the Vienna Opera opened, and out came Herr Müller, the archivist I remembered from decades ago. He was older now, his hair snowy white, but his gait was steady. He stepped to the podium set before the crowd and adjusted his spectacles. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice firm and measured, "the Vienna Opera wishes to address the recent reports concerning the recordings of our esteemed colleague." My breath caught. I leaned closer to the screen. "These recordings," he said, holding up a leather-bound ledger, "were entrusted to us in 1983 for restoration and preservation. They have remained in our vaults ever since. Each reel is marked with unique identifiers, catalog numbers, technical notes, and the artist's own handwriting. They are intact, secure, and priceless." The crowd erupted in applause. I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. Priceless. That was the word I had been waiting to hear. Müller continued, his voice carrying authority. "Let it be known. These recordings are part of Austria's cultural heritage. They cannot, under any circumstance, be sold, traded, or transferred. Any document claiming otherwise is a forgery." The word forgery hung in the air like a final chord struck with absolute clarity. I knew then that Clara's schemes had been stripped bare. The opera even displayed one of the reels to the cameras, a box labeled in my own handwriting, New York, 1980. My breath caught again, seeing the familiar scrawl, faded but still mine. To think it had been resting all this time, safe in the dark, waiting for this moment. Reporters shouted questions. What about the auction houses? Will there be an investigation? Müller raised a hand for silence. We are cooperating fully with the authorities. We will not allow this legacy to be misused. It was done. The curtain had lifted, the truth revealed. My music had been guarded better than I had dared hope, and the world now knew it. That evening the phones rang again. Old friends congratulated me, some even weeping with relief. Former students called, their voices trembling with pride. "They are safe, Frau Professor," one said. "Your music is safe." But it was not just friends. The public responded too. Letters poured in faster than I could read them. One from a woman in Brazil. "Your Chopin nocturnes gave me courage when my husband died. I am glad they remain ours." Another from a man in Japan. "I never saw you perform, but your recordings taught me what silence between notes can mean. Thank you. I sat at my desk late into the night, the letters spread before me like scattered sheet music. I felt less like a victim and more like a custodian who had been reminded of her duty. My music was not just mine. It belonged to all who had ever listened. As for Clara, she did not call that day. Not a word, not a message. Perhaps she was hiding, perhaps scheming still, but it no longer mattered. The opera had spoken with a voice stronger than hers could ever be. Before I went to bed, I wandered into the parlor and lifted the cover from the Steinway. The keys glowed softly in the lamplight. I sat, placed my fingers gently on the ivory, and played a few notes of Schubert. My hands were stiff, my touch weaker than it once was, but the sound was still there, round, resonant, alive. For the first time in years I felt that old rush, not of fame but of belonging. The world had not forgotten me, and my music, resting safely in the opera's vaults, would outlive us all. I closed the lid softly and whispered into the empty room, "Thank you." It was not gratitude to the opera, nor even to the journalist, but to the music itself, for staying faithful, for waiting, for enduring. The truth had been revealed, and with it, a part of me felt restored. The opera's announcement had stripped away the veil, but it was the courts that would do the rest. Within weeks, official summons were delivered to Clara, her elegant signature printed on the envelope like a badge of irony. I did not attend the hearings at first. My lawyer, Herr Weiss, assured me it was best to let the documents speak louder than my presence. Still, I followed every report, every headline, with the same intensity one once saved for reading a score before a premiere. The courtroom became its own stage, with Clara unwillingly cast as the leading lady. She arrived each day polished as ever, tailored suits, pearls at her throat, but the strain showed in the tightness of her smile. I knew that smile. It was the same one she wore when a lie balanced on her tongue. The prosecution presented the forged auction papers first. They displayed them on a large screen so even the back row could see. "Note the inconsistencies," the attorney pointed out. "The incorrect birthplace, the misspelled middle name, the mismatched seals. These are not careless errors. They are deliberate attempts at deception." Clara's lawyer tried to argue that the documents were draft proposals, never intended for circulation. But the auction houses, Sotheby's and Christie's, sent representatives who testified with unmistakable firmness. "We have no record of such lots. These documents are forgeries, plain and simple." My name rang through the courtroom, not as a performer but as a plaintiff. I winced each time it was spoken, but I held my head high when interviewed outside my home. I entrusted my legacy to music, not to money, I told a young reporter. Anyone who says otherwise is speaking lies. The evidence deepened. Bank records revealed Clara's debts, mountains of them, amassed from failed ventures and reckless spending. She had mortgaged her apartment twice, taken loans under her company's name, and owed more than she could ever repay. The plan had been clear. Sell what she could never rightfully own, cover her debts, and perhaps even climb higher in her glittering world of art management. When this came to light, even Clara's polished mask began to crack. Witnesses described her boasting at private dinners about securing a major cultural asset, hinting at millions soon to flow her way. She had spun the fantasy too widely, too carelessly, and now every thread was being pulled. The opera, too, sent its archivists to testify. They produced the originals, my recordings, stored and catalogued since 1983. The judge examined them closely, noting the official ledger with my signature and the opera's seal. "There is no question," he declared. "The authentic works are safeguarded here. The defendant had no legal or moral right to claim otherwise." I attended the final day of testimony. Sitting quietly in the gallery, I listened as Clara was asked point-blank, "Did you or did you not forge your aunt's signature?" She faltered then, her voice breaking for the first time. I only wanted to protect her." she whispered. But her words rang hollow in the silent chamber. Protect me? By stealing from me? By selling the heart of my life as though it were scrap to be auctioned off? The judge's ruling was firm. Clara was guilty of forgery and fraud. Sentencing would come later, but her reputation, so carefully cultivated, was already ruined. Her name appeared in the press now not as a rising figure in art management but as a cautionary tale. I left the courtroom with her Weiss at my side, the autumn air brisk against my face. Reporters pressed forward, microphones thrust like bayonets. "How do you feel about your niece's conviction?" one asked. I paused, searching for the right words. "Betrayal is bitter," I said softly. "But truth is stronger. And truth has prevailed." That night I sat once more at my Steinway. My hands hovered over the keys, stiff and slow, but I began to play. Not a grand concerto, not even a full sonata, but a simple lullaby my mother once sang. The notes filled the room gently, like forgiveness whispered through music. Clara had been exposed. Justice had spoken. And though my heart ached with the weight of family broken, I felt a strange lightness. The music was safe. The world had not let it vanish into shadows. And neither, I reminded myself, had I. After the trial, when the noise of scandal began to fade, I sat quietly in my parlor and asked myself what should become of it all. The Steinway, the recordings, the history bound up in both. For years I had guarded them as my treasures, but I realized then that they were never meant to be hidden in a single house. The Vienna Opera invited me to their archives. For the first time in decades, I walked through those heavy doors, leaning on my cane, my heart pounding like a young girl before her debut. They led me to the vaults, and there they were. The original reels, labeled in my handwriting, resting safe and untouched. I felt tears slip down my cheeks. It was like meeting old friends again. That evening I made my decision. I donated the Steinway and the recordings to a new foundation housed within the opera. Not for auction, not for private collectors, but for the public, for students, for musicians, for anyone who needed music as badly as I once had. When the announcement was made, the world responded not with pity but with applause. Concert halls played my recordings again, and young pianists spoke of me not as a victim, but as a guardian who had preserved something precious. I am no longer on stage, but I have returned to the spotlight in another way. Not as a performer, but as a living bridge between the past and the future. And that, my dear, is enough. My dears, if in this story you saw yourselves, be sure to write about it in the comments. I would be very interested to read it. Thank you.